A question that we get all the time is, why did we choose to open up a storefront? When I started Fat Miilk in 2020, it was at the height of the pandemic. I was terrified of brick and mortar. Like at that moment, restaurants were closing down, cafes were closing down, like anything that had a physical location was a threat to the economy. So I was just like, we have to go direct to consumer. We have to open up e-commerce and just try to figure out how to do it that way. What I learned during that experience is that coffee is such an in-person experience, especially food and beverage, right? Like if you have a food and beverage product, you want people to try it. And so we would be doing so many pop-ups, like anywhere and everywhere. I'm telling you, we popped up at Chinese restaurants. We even set up a table on the side of Lakeshore Drive, like a lemonade stand. But the idea is that people needed to try this product. And I did pop-ups for probably, 2.5, 3 years. And during that time, I realized the number one question that people would ask us is, where can we get you next week? It was always like, where can we get you consistently, right? And so that's when I realized, like, damn, if we're really going to exist, we need to have a physical location. And in that moment, it was just like, okay, we have a CBG line, we're doing wholesale, but we need to be able to give customers what they want. For a year, I was looking at locations and literally negotiated probably 4 different leases before I landed on the one that we have now. It was very, very intentional for us to have a storefront that was meaningful to the brand. I just knew if we're going to have a storefront in Chicago, it has to be in Uptown. That is the Southeast Asian corridor of Chicago. And it just felt like home. And so one weekend, I parked my car on a random street and I walked the streets of Uptown and took photos. Literally, I still have those photos until today. Every single vacant storefront that could potentially be a Fat Miilk location, right? And I even took a photo of the place that we're in now, even though I was extremely intimidated by that corner spot in that space. I wanted to be a part of that community. I wanted Fat Miilk to grow with a community that was so vibrant and so intentional and very culturally conscious. And so that led me to start conceptualizing, what does this space need to be in order to be successful, right? And so when I think about the overall concept of Fat Miilk, it really bleeds into coffee culture in America today. And I believe that customers want something that's high quality, they want convenience, and they want consistency. Those 3 things were at the cornerstone of how I envisioned Fat Miilk to be. So I knew in order for Fat Miilk to be successful, I had to build something that I wanted to be a part of, right? And so it's one of those things where company culture was so important to me. My dad has 2 full service restaurants and I managed that restaurant whenever I was in pharmacy school. And I learned if one part of that system didn't show up for work, you were screwed. You were going to have to figure out how to keep going and have that service for the day. And so that was the kind of approach that I had going into building the concept of Fat Miilk, is that how do we do this where it's sustainable, it's a small CapEx to be able to do this, and it makes sense for the brand, right? And so that's one thing that I always tell people, is that when you see how other people are doing it out there and how your competitors are doing, always reverse engineer that and be like, does that make sense for me? Is that something that is in line with the vision that I have and the lifestyle that I have for this company and this brand? And so it was one of those things where I needed to design this space and conceptualize this space where, if worst comes to worst, only one person could potentially run the whole entire ship from A to Z. That was imperative about not only, I was thinking employee first, I was thinking of the team first, and then built the concept around that, right? And still till this day, we only require 2 people on staff during the weekdays and 3 people on the weekends. Like when I tell people that, their mind is blown on how simplistic our entire operations is. And the idea is that I doubled down on systems and processes, and I had people who were amazing at what they do, customer service, and had a really low barrier in needing to learn how to onboard the Fat Miilk way. I conceptualized this entire concept with people in mind first.
Here it is. We have the official building permit from the city of Chicago, and I cannot freaking wait to get everyone in here to build this concept that I have envisioned since I conceptualized Fat Miilk. Look, it's so much more than just putting an espresso machine into a place and calling it a coffee shop. I've visualized and literally conceptualized this concept, this look and feel, this whole way to communicate Vietnamese coffee culture, and it is going to be so worth the wait.
One thing that I really wanted to showcase in the space was the multitude of what makes Vietnamese coffee culture. And people have no idea that Vietnam is the #1 coffee producer of Robusta and the second biggest coffee producer behind Brazil in the world, So we are such huge players in the coffee game. And so many people think of Vietnamese coffee as such a linear perspective. They just think it's Vietnamese coffee or just, strong, bold, coffee that is known for instant coffee with a little bit of condensed milk. That's typically how you're going to experience it if you go to a pho restaurant or a banh mi restaurant. That is literally how it's presented. But what I wanted to showcase in the storefront is all of the exciting and the multi-dimensional aspect of what makes Vietnamese coffee culture. And it's 3 things to me. 1, not only do I think Vietnam is such a huge player in that, but they are #1 for Robusta. So what does that mean? When you think about the soil, the altitude, the environment, all of those things, it is the perfect breeding ground for this species, right? And a lot of people don't know, it's like coffee is so similar to wine. It has their varieties, different species. It's just like your grapes, like your Pinots, your Cabs, your Chardonnays, like all of that is so similar to coffee. And so Vietnam is known for the Robusta bean. And that yields a very bold and nutty and chocolatey flavor profile. And it has twice the caffeine content. It is strong. And so not only are we known for that bean, and I wanted the storefront to, for people to have access to that bean, I wanted people to experience how we brew it, right? And so the other part of Vietnamese coffee culture is that fin drip. And what is a fin? A fin is pretty much, I explain it as a mix between a French press and a pour over. It is one of the most sustainable filter tools for coffee, and it's something that is commonly used in Vietnamese coffee culture. You put the coffee in there, you put the hot water, and it takes about 5, 10, 15 minutes sometimes to brew. It is a very communal experience. In Vietnam, you're sitting down, you go to a coffee shop, you sit there for hours with your friends, your coworkers, your family, and you're forced to sit down and actually have a conversation. And it's so different in America where everyone is about go, go, go. They're about convenience. So I went into this space conceptualizing how do we merge the two, right? I really wanted to honor the traditional way of how we brew Vietnamese coffee, and it's through that fin drip. And so when you come into the space, I was like, man, we really have to utilize these beautiful windows. There's this corner in the space where the idea was, I took a lot of inspiration from, ice cream and like Italian restaurants where you see people, making ice cream in the store or like, rolling up pasta dough in the window. I think it just yields such a fresh and inviting perspective into what they're really doing behind the scenes. And so I wanted to have this open kitchen kind of concept, this idea where people are like, wow, what is that? You guys are really brewing this like here now, like right in front of our eyes. We have the fin drip that takes, anywhere from 15, 20 minutes to brew to now it's like, how do we merge it where people can come in and have it almost instantly? And so I conceptualize a space where we're brewing batches and batches of slow drip fin coffee, but we hook it up to a tap and you can have it instantly. And so the idea is people are coming in and they're getting that really traditional way of brewing Vietnamese coffee. They're getting that fin drip. And the great thing about that is that it yields such a bold, concentrated cup of coffee. And that brings me to my third point, is that I wanted people to really have access to not only the bean, but different ways of enjoying Vietnamese coffee, right? A lot of times, the reason why people add a little bit of sweetened condensed milk to Vietnamese coffee or Vietnamese Robusta beans, because it pairs so nicely with that bold and that nutty and chocolatey flavor profile, right? But there are so many other flavor notes and so many other dimensions in Robusta beans where I wanted people to like have it as an espresso. I wanted people to have it as a latte. I wanted people to have it as drip coffee. I wanted people to have it as a cold brew. All of these different things, it showcases the multi-dimension of what Vietnamese coffee culture really is. But I knew when it comes to Vietnamese coffee culture and American sip culture, we had to figure out how to merge the two. And so this Fin Lab showcases how we honor the Vietnamese traditional way of brewing coffee while putting it through a tap system, and you can get it instantly, less than 30 seconds. If you want to, you're in and out. And I wanted to at least make sure that we were a model that could do that kind of volume because the space was so small. And so when you're in a space that is 670 square feet, for an example, that to me shows that we need volume. We need to be able to get people in and get people out. And the only way to do that is through your systems and through your processes. We'll talk more about the Fin Drip Lab in a different conversation, but that was the idea behind conceptualizing, putting team members first and doubling down on systems and processes. So what was really important for me is that Fat Miilk is actually a merger and this beautiful synergy and mix of Vietnamese coffee culture and American coffee culture, which are two completely different values, two completely different things, but so unique and beautiful in its own way, right? And I think in order to be successful, I recognize that I had to build brand trust in what we were doing. People needed to try this coffee and know and trust the way that we wanted it to be represented, right? I think in the early years of Fat Miilk, I just learned so much. Like, yes, was I fearful of a storefront? Absolutely. Did we launch as a CBG company and like selling direct to consumer? Yes. Was that successful? Absolutely. You know, all of these things, I learned so many nuggets about how to run this business, listening to the customer, what people were saying. We did a ton of pop-ups out there. And I realized that I am so blessed to be in an industry where we can actually have an in-person experience, right? And I can't necessarily say that for all food and beverage CBG companies out there. And so what I recognized when we were building this brand, I had to be able to meet the customer exactly where they are. And one thing that I realized, because I'm a consumer of this as well, is that I read that over 80% of coffee consumption in the United States happens through a coffee shop. This was an absolute no-brainer for me to not only listen to my customers, understand how it is enjoyed and consumed in the US, and take all of that information and create a space that really allows us to showcase everything that we've built, you know, the years prior to that through our CBG line, and understanding our customers and how we want to represent Vietnamese coffee culture into a physical space. In all honesty, I created a coffee shop experience that I felt did not exist. I wanted to build a coffee shop experience that had all of those things encompassing within Vietnamese coffee culture. And so I took bits and pieces from all of these places that I've been to, all of these coffee shops that, you know, I admired and respected what they were doing. And I just took little nuggets from there. But I think ultimately Fat Miilk stands on its own turf. I look at Fat Miilk and I truly believe that we are a pioneer in this space, not only when it comes to culture and coffee, but overall how we approach the coffee business. And so I took inspiration from everywhere, but I truly feel like what Fat Miilk is doing is so unique to us, and I'm so excited to see what the future looks like.